City of Stevens Point Housing Taskforce meeting, recorded February 22nd, 2023.
Our first item is a roll call. Should we do a formal roll call?
Nope, I've got it written down. We do have quorum.
Director Karnowski's got a list of those in attendance, and we have a few community members here as well. Our second item then is looking at the final draft of the Housing Task Force white paper report. It was included in the agenda. It's about 18 pages long, and for those of us that are here in person, we have paper copies. So we'll take a look over. We'll try to go goal by goal if we can, as we have it broken down in our agenda here, so that we can have either any final edits or thoughts, and then I assume, Director, we're looking for like a final approval of the document as a whole, or goal by goal?
Sure. So there's really two ways that the body could go about it. It is the final draft. It does not include just some background demographic information that was presented super early on in this endeavor. That will be added. We were just finalizing some population projections, housing needs kind of internally. So if the body wishes, you could adopt it pretty much as is, with the knowledge that the background information will be added and presented to the council at a later date. Or if you want to see the actual final document, you could always give your recommendation now and then ask for another meeting just to review the full-fledged document. Yep, totally up to the body though.
For those that are in attendance from the group, is there a preference that anyone would like to voice as to having that demographic, or if we feel comfortable making final approval today?
I think we feel comfortable, or I do.
You feel good today? Okay.
I would second that.
Lovely. That was coming from Bobby Joy.
I have no preference.
No preference. Okay, that sounds good. I think we'll be able to do it today. I trust the demographic information. We've already had a look at it many months ago, preliminary, but I don't expect any radical predictions from or off-kilter statistical analysis from the department. Okay, let's take a look at goal number one then, which is decreasing housing insecurity in the city of Stevens Point.
So a lot of this information we've already reviewed and approved. Based on our last presentation and discussion, there were a few recommendations that were either included or amended, the first of which being goal number one, community engagement opportunity, or recommendation number two. So in response to that conversation about an overall strategy and no utilization of the federal funding or other programmatic funding that exists, this goal was added. So in this recommendation, ideally this would fit within the Housing Authority's scope of work or some other alteration if the Housing Authority were to address that in partnership with another body. In addition to that goal, goal number one, economic development opportunities or recommendations number 2 through 3, there have been a lot of discussion about creating a solution for folks with immediate transitional housing needs. As a reminder, that this would be a gap fill until until transitional housing is available. The city is open to exploring the use of loans to improve housing for LMI households or individuals and formerly incarcerated individuals too. And at any point, I'm just going to list in these added in items in response to our conversation, but if there's any questions you want to stop to discuss any of these, please throw up a hand and ask. And the final goal, or the final recommendation for goal number one that was added or amended, was economic development opportunity number 4. The eviction, diversion, or prevention programs were amended or appended to this document to include a mediation services. There are upcoming opportunities in the region for mediation training with some partners in the Wausau area, and we have the fortunate circumstance of being connected with those services. So it might be an asset that we can leverage sooner rather than later. So those are the only changes for goal number 1 that I've included since our last discussion. So at that point,
And that's under the community engagement?
No.
Component under all of it?
all of goal number 1. So community engagement and economic development were the 2 areas where we saw the most change.
And just for the folks listening at home or online, so the purpose of the Housing Task Force was to put together recommended changes that the city could implement as it relates to our housing needs, and our housing stock. This is just a report that will ultimately go as an informational item to the city council, and then the council could direct staff to implement these and go through the appropriate approval processes. Zoning changes, for example, would have to go through the city plan commission. Some of the redevelopment authority based items would have to go through the redevelopment authority. So I think it's really important to note that this is just a policy recommendation document. It does not mean anything is set in stone. There are still additional steps that the city would have to take in order to implement any of these. So,
Are we going to be, is this going to be the final, like, for this group, or is this group going to continue to meet and push out more, or is this going to be, this is the sum of what we're giving council?
this is the sum of what would be provided to council. The idea was that this body would have wrapped up its work by the end of 2022. There were some months that we didn't meet for various reasons, so that's why we pushed it a little further. But unless there's a need for the Housing Task Force to continue to meet, this body would essentially be disbanded after this point.
Okay.
And I think this would be coming up then at the March council meeting as a part of the council's adoption of it on the agenda. And so that would be an opportunity for any of the members of this task force, if you would like to come and speak on behalf of the document or in support of the, document, or laying out any experience you had as part of, emphasizing, either what you learned from the experience being a part of this, or some part that you want to emphasize that you felt was important. That would be an appropriate time, I think. And that communication could also come in the form of an email, or, calling members of council, just to, I think, help bridge the communication between this group, which only has 2 people from council on it, and for the entire body, which will hopefully be prioritizing and taking recommendations. If you have a question, please come up to the lectern, please. Yep.
Thank you. Thank you for letting me speak. Cindy Nabel, 1100 Phillips Street. I was told at our last meeting that you had, which was city planning, and a lot of people came and talked about different points they had, it was mentioned that there was a surprise that when you had your next housing task force, that the community didn't come to that, and that's when they could have spoken more, where it's much easier to speak there and have a back and forth conversation rather than a limited amount of time that you get to speak the 3 minutes at a council meeting. Lots of us were told that we should be coming to this one to bring forth anything that we wanted to address and have you look at, or reasonings of why there's some pushback on some of these things, like the family definition. So is that not something we will be doing today at all?
If you have something you'd like to say, you can certainly say it. Recognizing that we did continue to have discussions and review this document as a draft last month, or in January, and then this here today we're looking at as a final proposal. And so a lot of the discussions that we did have last month reaffirmed what is in here, and as Chris will be going through some of the different recommendations that got I would say most of this has been fleshed out even more with more rationale. And then from the experience and knowledge that this body has garnered collectively, particularly you're speaking to the family definition, I don't think this body's recommendation is going to be altered much because that was a strong feeling from this group as a whole, and we kind of reaffirmed that in our January meeting.
So this group and this body is not having, because I was told it was a public meeting to discuss, and that, back in the past, people didn't think they could come to this. It wasn't told that it was a public meeting, but Melissa did say, and it was in the paper, that she was so surprised, and so that's why many of us thought, okay, then we should be coming forward and talking to this body about what the concerns were so they could maybe be addressing those. And so I don't know if you even got any of those things. It sounds like you're just doing it whatever you've been working on, not what came from any of the Plan Commission. Got a lot of recommendations to look into, and I don't see any of that in this packet at all, of the numbers of what we were looking for to say what the numbers of homeless actually are, how many of those homeless have drug addiction issues or police record, issues, or money-wise, and what kind of amount of money, how many of them have been here, how long, that we're not just getting the people that are here all of a sudden this past year. We've been going through COVID, so there's so many different parts of this that seems to not been discussed with people, that it will affect all of the residents in this town and that have properties, that own properties. And so the best way to do it, and you mentioned it in here, is get the public support. And one of them would have been to have had some people that live in these, because of the areas you're looking at, even though you say you want this density throughout Stevens Point, none of this is looking at other areas other than right here in the core of the area of the city, which already has so much density and rentals that it will affect property values and any of the things that the city has been doing for the downtown, especially if we lose having our city buildings down here or the county buildings down here. It's scary to me to look at that we're looking at only as this area as a way to a solution. And it hasn't, the other record things that people were asking have not been brought forward. In this packet, hasn't been changed really from the last time.
I think I can address a couple of those if you don't.
Just one more, because Cindy, I don't want to get into a back and forth as much
Sure.
as I would like this to be, we have
And if it isn't,
maintained a
that's
more
okay.
informal process, but I would still like to respect like a 3-minute, and if you have points
Sure.
to make and questions to ask. And I think it sounds, one, I'm hearing a question of process or what has happened here, and these have all been public meetings, and this task force has continued to be public. So if that was mistakenly understood or communicated, sorry to hear that, but they've all been published in the appropriate open meetings rules. So we haven't been doing anything.
I do understand they were published.
Yeah,
I'm
okay.
not saying they weren't. It was a committee that was made up, and it was just the task force. And I tried to get involved in that over a year ago. Never got any response.
And then,
Okay.
so we are going through, and we are, we're here to discuss these final changes and look at this. But we've taken in a lot of responses, and we are distilling all of that into this document. And this comes from a lot of time both on staff and their
agree.
experience and knowledge, and this is a citywide document. It's not calling out any particular neighborhood or thing, but it really is intended to be representative as recommendations for the city as a whole.
So Nancy online has her hand up.
Okay. Did you have anything else
I thought you were
further?
he was going to.
I was just going to say, I think at that meeting specifically, a lot of the homelessness aspect got tied to the change in the definition of family, and I don't feel like throughout the year leading up to it that had been really the purpose of this group, the intent of this group. I think that was an addition that would help that, but I think there was a lot more detail that went into it than just that, and I think it was kind of perceived at that meeting that was a bulk of the reason we were moving that recommendation forward, and it wasn't. There was 12 months of discussion on 100 other topics that related to that kind of tied into that.
And I do see that in the document, that there are different sections completely. And so, again, though, it would be, any of this going to the, forward to the Common Council to adopt this, it takes, in effect, the whole city. And I don't feel like the residents were really brought into this discussion, it's people that had specific involvement with homeless or rent-ready or, rentals that, had a dog in this because you're trying to help out with this and you have some rentals and what can you do to help? I understand that, but then it doesn't bring in the respect of the homeowners that are in the areas that have the high density that need to also have a say, a part in this. It should have been a community-wide where people that should have been on the committee also, I think, not just people that were with the church and that work with the homeless or with the rent issues.
Okay, so, yep, I think we're hearing your frustration with the composition of the group. Nancy Roppy, would you like to speak?
Yes, I would, as a matter of fact. I agree with everything Cindy has said. I was also told that we needed to come to this meeting or start coming to these meetings, and they may have been noticed, but I'll go back and look at the agendas. I don't believe there was ever an agenda item that said that public comment would be taken, and that's why I didn't attend, because what's the point of attending if I can't speak? When this task force was formed, I was under the mistaken impression that the intent was to get housing for the unhoused. And so I guess I kind of thought that you would be engaging with the unhoused population and trying to match them up with existing rental properties. And evidently what you guys actually did was you wrote a term paper. John Gardner spoke eloquently at the Plan Commission meeting telling you that changing the definition of family to 4 unrelated was a crazy idea. And I was also told that he met repeatedly with Mr. Karnowski and explained it in further detail. And here we get this term paper, and you haven't made any change to that whatsoever. You're going to make the entire city multifamily. That is insane. And then I read this attached memo from Mr. Cordes saying there have been no problems reported. Well, he fails to tell you that the reporting system was non-functional for about a year. And as far as I know, you still cannot search anything on it. At the last snow emergency, this vehicle was parked in front of my property for the entire snow emergency. And I called to complain. I called dispatch every time the students park out on the street, which I was told was not going to happen, that they would diligently move. The dispatcher told me that there's nobody on the night shift doing parking enforcement. And so the only people doing parking enforcement overnight are the police, and they will only do it if they have nothing else to do. So Mr. Cordes is 100% wrong. We're having all kinds of problems, but there's no resolution to them because you push it off onto the police department that has no capacity to do anything about it. So it's very disappointing that you're pushing forward this white paper. I want to say this one last thing. After the Plan Commission meeting, I reached out to Pastor Jane because I felt terrible about the fact that there are unhoused people in this community. And I know I get a lot of criticism about my comments. And so I told her that my husband Joe and I would be willing to sponsor somebody's rent. Let's say, for instance, they can only afford $500 a month, okay? We would, and the rent is $700. I said, we would cough up that additional $200 for a year to help those people get on their feet. And we've heard back. She said, oh, that was wonderful. Thank you. You've restored my faith in society. We've heard nothing since then. So I don't know where that's going. Here we have somebody who's willing to sponsor an actual homeless person, an actual unhoused person, and there's been no action on it whatsoever. You, as far as I know, you guys have not moved one person from homelessness into housing as a committee, as a task force, but you did write a white paper. Congratulations with that. It's a great disappointment as far as I'm concerned. I think you should disband because basically you've wasted your time, our time, and everybody's time. Because what you're going to do is take an unstable area that the full-time residents I've been trying to stabilize, and you're going to further destabilize it. Oh, I also heard that there's at least 3 landlords on your task force. Raise your hand if you will rent to a felon. Are there any there that are raising their hands?
My hands
I
up.
doubt it.
No, my
I
hands
doubt
up.
it. So if the landlords that are on your task force won't even rent to this population, this is a big wet kiss to the landlords. That's basically all it is. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments, Nancy. Yes, I think the goal of the Housing Task Force, as we initially set out, was rather ambitious because we were looking to address housing issues in a variety of facets and different ways. And so, and the paper and the recommendation that we can really make as a group, again, is the role of the city and what the responsibility of the city is. So while we can't do everything, and the city is not in a position to act as the sole solution to a lot of these things, I think one of the issues that being brought up as people who are unsheltered, we look to recommend working with existing agencies to come together as a housing coalition and to leverage greater resources that may be available for the community, and the city can play a role in that. So that's in both organizing that and participating in that. So that's some of what we are trying to do.
Yeah, and if anyone has questions relating to the initial establishment of the Housing Task Force, I'm more than happy to send you the information that was put together by Alder Dalton, Alder Johnson, and a few others as well when that went through Common Council. The intention was never to eradicate homelessness through this committee. This committee's done exactly as it was intended, and that was put together a report, a white paper, or term paper, however you want to phrase it, and provide that to the council as a policy recommendation document so they could make informed decisions outside of the normal confines of city government, essentially. We wanted more involvement. So I do think the task force has done quite a bit of good work here, and I think that we've taken a lot of really good information. And I'll be done with that. So thank you.
Does anyone have any further comments on particularly goal number 1, addressing housing insecurity? Yes, go right ahead.
Yeah, my name is Raymond Cal, and I applaud you for your efforts at dealing with affordable housing in our community. I think it's very important that we do that. I am totally opposed, however, to the proposals here that are basically a bonanza and a giveaway to absentee landlords, many of whom maintain substandard housing in our community. Now, in your document, there was some section where you claim there are no substandard housing in Stevens Point. Oh, it's just 27 units, and most of those are owner-occupied. If you don't recognize that we have substandard housing being rented out to UWSP students and recent graduates, you guys are sticking your heads in the ground and not paying attention to what's going on, and you're certainly not speaking to UWSP students. I have a niece and a nephew. Nephew just graduated from UWSP. He's now a first-year teacher here in Stevens Point. Niece worked at sophomore at UWSP, living off campus. The housing for them sucks, okay? It's terrible. You have to hang blankets over the windows to try keeping the cold out of your room. They have utility bills that are more than double for a small little 3-bedroom house. They're more than double what I pay for my much larger house, because the landlord doesn't give a crap about whether they have lousy insulation in the home, whether they took a garage and converted it to a bedroom and didn't bother to insulate it because they didn't want to spend the money. And when you go around and talk to some of these new landlords, we were going through a bit of a generational shift in landlords in this community, where older folks who built up their little housing empires are now deciding to cash in because they want to retire, and now they're selling their homes to the highest bidder. And we do have cases where that's going to be an owner-occupied home, but more often than not, they're just selling to some other young real estate shark who wants to build up their own real estate empire. And I've talked to some of them, and their main goal is bringing in the cash flow so they build up a down payment for the next home they can bring in. The last thing they consider is, what do I need to do to make this a decent house? How do I insulate it? How do I put in new windows? How do I paint it? How do I fix the frickin' leaking plumbing? None of that is being done. So when I read here that there's no substandard housing that we have to worry about in Stevens Point, that's just telling me you certainly made no effort to go out there and talk to the students who have to live in the housing like this. So that's one major issue that I'm really disappointed as I go through here. You talk here about solutions like guaranteeing compensation to landlords who don't get paid their rent. Boy, if I'm a landlord, I love this. You guys are bringing it on, baby. I don't even have to worry about collecting my rent. If they don't pay me, I'll just come to you and you'll set up a program to pay me my compensation. Give me a break. If you are going to make changes to the number of people who can live in a home, it should be restricted to owner-occupied homes and owner-occupied owned only while the owner is living in the home. Because, frankly, I believe an owner who owns a home is going to care for that property a whole lot better than the absentee landlords who are building up their little mini housing empires, okay? I think you have to really look at yourself and ask yourself, do you really believe that we don't have substandard housing here that students are living in? You're not talking to any of them if you believe that. Any change that you make to allow more density in the homes should be restricted to those homes that are owner-occupied. So if you were proposing to go from the current definition of one unrelated to two unrelated, I would welcome that. I would accept that. I can deal with that because I really do believe an owner-occupied home is going to be cared for a lot better. A big part of this talked about no cost and low cost. Well, there's may be no cost to writing a new ordinance and throwing it out there, but there's a big cost to the neighborhoods that are going to be deteriorating as housing gets gobbled up by more landlords jamming in more people and not really caring about what that's doing to the neighborhood. And you go around, the closer you get to the neighborhoods around UWSP, the worse it gets. You go to Oshkosh, and you'll see it even worse because they've had even looser restrictions than we've had. And you look at absolutely deplorable housing around the UW Oshkosh locations, and you're just going to add more of that to what we have here. So those are the big problems I see. An interesting information you had here was what you called missing middle housing. And as we consider that concept of missing middle housing, I would suggest we look at areas in Stevens Point, namely the convent grounds, where once the convent itself is converted to apartments, once the townhomes that are part of Phase 1 are done, you still have a bunch of acreage that you're planning to put some kind of housing on. That would be a property that is prime for appropriate development. And I live immediately across the street from the convent, so I have no objection to the convent being converted to apartments, to townhomes being built, to other housing being built there. And I would encourage you to look at that property and how you handle it. Another deficit that we have here that is alluded to a bit in the report is the acknowledgement that the Housing Authority has failed to add new units in Stevens Point. If I understand from my conversations with Ryan Konofsky, it's been over 40 years since the Housing Authority added a single unit. I realize HUD dollars are at a premium, they're difficult to get, you have to work at it, but my gosh, folks, other cities have gotten HUD dollars to add to their housing stocks. Have we not had an opportunity in 40 years to do the same? There's got to be opportunities if there's a will, and that's what I would like to see more attention given to. But again, I totally oppose changing the ordinance in a way that's just going to open up the floodgates to absentee landlords coming in and reaping the benefits of that. Thank you.
Thank you.
One of our meetings had a presentation from HUD. Wasn't it the entire meeting was dedicated?
Idawu did make a presentation about the Stevens Point Housing.
That's archived if you want to go back and watch it. It's a lot of this had been discussed previously, and there was an entire session dedicated to a presentation on all of that.
I want to say that was in July or June, maybe. But we did, there is a complex of network of why the housing authority is in the position they are in, and Director Idawu, the head of the housing authority, we had a whole meeting about their role in the housing issues, so I think that's a good resource and definitely informed our work and also our city staff's moving forward in the relationship with them as well.
July 2022?
I think it was July. I don't remember specifically, but
we can send the link out, and actually that link will be part of the final document. Where all of the presentations that this group had received will be part of that final document, and people can watch those presentations.
All right. Any other comments, questions on goal number 1? I appreciate the questions and concerns. I think some of those concerns are addressed in community engagement opportunity number 2, and then the action plan or recommended action plan that has been posted at the end of the document.
my question is really for staff here who will be kind of assuming this is adopted by the council, does the city staff feel comfortable with the recommendations that are here and championing them, given that you are also a part of this process and also participating in these, largely you will be the administrators of this?
For the most part, yes. I think this body has talked about staff's reservations about changing the definition of family. I think we've talked through that pretty extensively. I've given my opinion on it a number of times to this group and the Plan Commission. For everyone listening at home, there is going to be a meeting on March 6th. That will be City Plan Commission, or for discussion only, not action, but for discussion only, will be some recommendations from staff as it relates to definition of family. Again, for some of the folks that spoke, this body has no authority to change anything. It's really just a policy recommendation group. So that will ultimately go through Plan Commission or whatever other committee that needs to go through in order to be implemented. But yeah, as it relates to your question directly, Madam Chair, the definition of family is the only one that staff has had reservation on.
And previously, staff has articulated that perhaps +1 rather than +2 was something that they would be interested or see as a next step for incorporating that. Yes. That was recommended at the December commission as well as one of the options. So, and I know we've talked about that extensively as a group here. Great. Let's vote on this as a package at the end, because I think that will be okay. And let's take a look at goal number 2, diversifying and expanding the city's housing stock for all residents. If Chris, you want to walk us through.
Yep, absolutely. So changes made based on last meeting. There have been questions and concerns about some of the parking recommendations, some of the zoning recommendations in particular, to identify and call out what changes should be made and what parcels or what zoning districts should be affected. So those have all been added into goal 2, zoning opportunity recommendation number 2. All that is in there. We've stricken some language out of it, such as unbundling parking, after some careful evaluation of how unbundling has been impacting our community and rental prices at some locations. So that's been removed as a recommendation, as it's increased rents pretty significantly at a few rental properties in the community. But removing parking minimums has been maintained within the document, and then all of the specific setback requirements and reducing lot requirements for specific zoning districts has been added in there. In economic development, recommendation number 3, this has been previously discussed, but up till now has not been included. This has been incorporated into a few conversations that we've had with local home builders about the, reservation of form-based codes and the ability to implement those, how we can expedite the construction of newer types of homes and styles of homes within Stevens Point. So that was added in. And then lastly, community engagement. Opportunity number 1, after careful review, it seems like there's a lot of disconnect between city representatives and city staff and the community at large about the housing needs within the community. And this item was added in to carefully promote the housing needs, or at least share what the housing needs are within the community. And then numbers 2 and 3, concern was raised about still missing services to address those with immediate need for shelter when exiting the justice system. And so these two recommendations were also added. Oxford houses tend to be a popular amenity within our community. There's a high demand for them. And so as a community engagement process, those who are willing to and able to operate those locations continue to work with those who can. And that's all for goal number 2.
I appreciate the specificity and even referencing. I think our meetings that will serve the future very well as we come back to this, and or future council members or staff reference back to this. I think that will be a really helpful.
Trevor has a comment.
And I do like a lot of those mirror that what I handed out with the Wisconsin League of Municipalities, a lot of their recommended changes from their toolkit for affordable housing.
Yeah, there's certainly a theme with a lot of those recommendations, both with Wisconsin League of Municipalities and a few other smart urbanist groups that are out and sharing and promoting affordable housing, and also variation of housing in communities.
I do have a couple extra copies of that letter from Wisconsin League of Municipalities up here if anyone wants one.
Trevor Rourke, if you'd like to speak, please go ahead.
Sure, thank you, Commissioner Dalton and Alder Dalton. Yeah, just looking through this, I might not share as many sentiments or as many concerns, but I am, I guess, sharing more of the excitement of some of the things I'm reading about and seeing. As some people here know, I've been speaking to City Council, Plan Commission, Public Works, et cetera, and this task force about removing parking minimums for years. So to see this on a document is pretty exciting. So thank you for that. And of course, some other really cool zoning initiatives that are in here. I did talk with, Chris, you mentioned the concern with unbundling as a methodology to reduce costs for renting. And I talked with Mark Cordes from Community Development on that, and it seemed to make sense, especially the perspective he was sharing with how to regulate it. And I definitely share and don't fully understand all the difficulties and possibly the unintended consequences. I did do some more digging about unbundling, and it seems like more cities are moving in this direction, as well as the fact that it is not easy to do. Because, right, we have, say a landlord that would remove the cost of parking and essentially unbundling it from the cost of rent. And then a renter, if they want to park, they would have to pay for that parking spot, right? And then those that decide, hey, I don't have a car or can't afford it or lost my license or I like using the bus, whatever it might be, they don't have to pay that parking spot fee. But regulating that, I could understand, is very difficult. So it's not something I'll fully give up on. I'll do more research and more digging on it, and hopefully I can find some really good models in different cities. There are a number of cities around the country that are doing this, so maybe they're bigger cities that have a lot more staff. It's very possible, right? So I'm not unrealistic about it. But yeah, thank you for the initiatives that are built in this.
Thank you, Mr. Rourke. And Bobby Joy, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. I just want to say it's been a privilege to serve on this Housing Task Force Advisory Committee. I think it was understood from the very beginning it was an advisory board. And, as I look over goal number 2, that this has been over a year-long process, this kind of goal number 2 kind of takes me back to where we were in the very beginning, that we were trying to look at the city's housing stock on behalf of all residents. And I think one of the original things was also making sure that Stevens Point and surrounding area has attractive housing to bring in workers, to bring in people to the community. And we've also had a chance to, look at all kinds of issues, like in terms of affordable housing, and also to look at the plight of those that are unsheltered or don't have, permanent home addresses and what their needs are. So, as stated, it's not a one-size-all recommendation, and we can't take that approach. But there's a lot of good in here, and I think it's a good document. Nothing's going to be perfect. In a lot of cases, you're trying to make incremental changes and incremental improvements. It's not going to all the problems are not going to be solved immediately. But it's good that we're having discussions. So I just wanted to throw that in there.
Thank you.
All right, set to move on to goal number 3?
Yes.
Fantastic. So there are no changes to the economic development recommendations within this. The same recommendations have been there and have been previously discussed. We also wanted to take a moment to notify you all that there have been no additions to the zoning opportunities, that we feel as staff, as we've drafted this section, that a lot of the zoning opportunities or recommendations that are referenced in earlier sections of the report are also addressing the need long-term in generating a variety of housing stock that can allow for entry at different price points within the housing market. We did take a look into a few other opportunities, making sure that cooperative styled housing or home ownership and that condominium styled home ownership is allowable on parcels and through zoning districts. It's not excluded, so it's already allowed. So we didn't need to make any changes there. Within community engagement, as identified in goal number 1, I think that the data table that is in that initial introduction to goal number 1, there's a significant population needing assistance with housing in later stages of life. There's a significant amount of housing stock that does fall in disrepair for those who can't afford to repair them and are living in their homes towards the end of their lives. And so staff had reached out to the director of the Aging and Disability Resource Center to discuss what options are available for them. And so we moved into address that with these community engagement opportunities. So with number 2, launching a citywide housing right sizing or repair campaign, there are financial assistance programs, or more financial planning assistance programs rather, for those who are in the situation. And so discussed this with the ADRC director, and there are some other programs that exist out in Vermont and other states that help incentivize or help support repair of those homes. This might be another opportunity to engage with our Habitat for Humanity contingency here in central Wisconsin to see if there's ways that we can leverage more volunteer support for repair of these homes. Lastly, an extension of goal number 2, community engagement opportunity or recommendation number 3, working with our local builders to generate a few I guess prefabbed or pre-designed condominium or cooperative style housing models that could be pinned and dropped onto new development plans.
As a council member, I also appreciate that both here and in the previous goal talks about adopting a formal TIF policy, because I think that, as we often hear, is one of the only leveraging negotiating points that the city has for economic development. And when we have a formal policy that says housing for our workforce is an important part of what we care about if you want to do business here, I think that's something that I have regrettably not been able to address in my term yet here, but I'm glad that it is at least recommended here.
It's coming to an end too.
I know, that's why I said that. Yeah. So, does anyone have anything on goal number 3? Yes, step up to the lectern.
And Trevor.
Trevor, I'll get to you right after the gentleman present in the building speaks.
Hello, Sam Lay, 1934 Water Street. I'd just like to say thanks for all the hard work you guys have put in on this. There's a need in our community with unsheltered people, and this task force, I think, is at least got the ball rolling on this. One of the things that I was looking at in this section that I noticed as I've been talking to people in the community is there is a lack of awareness, and that this launch a citywide effort to educate the public on adequate forms of housing ownership. This is one of these things that, as I've dealt with people at EDRC and ODC, that the people that are on the ground addressing this need our support. They do need to have a awareness campaign to help them in their jobs, just take people in that right direction. And I don't see where the plan is and how we are going to reach out to those people as professionals, but I think that is something that absolutely has to happen. So I'm glad to see that in there. Thank you.
Thank you. Trevor Rourke, go ahead.
Thank you, Alder Dalton. Trevor Rourke, 601 Washington. I apologize if I missed it. I read somewhere, I can't remember if it was in the memo, in the appendix, or in the some of the descriptions or realizations. But I guess it's kind of a question regarding ACUs, ADUs. I know there was 0 permits for this taken out so far. And my question is there a way or a recommendation, and again, I apologize if I missed it, a recommendation to streamline that process? Because from my understanding, ADUs or ACUs have a potential to assist folks in different stages of their life, depending if it's someone that needs help financially and they need to live in another situation with their family, moving in, back home, if you will, or if it's an older individual or someone even that needs assisted living with their family, kind of a live-in situation. So I'm wondering if that is on one of the recommendations, again, to streamline the ACU, ADU process.
So that was included in the memo in the back of the in the appendix of the document. We do currently have one ADU request, actually, that'll be before Plan Commission in March as well, if I'm not mistaken. So one of the things that you'll see, and we talk quite a bit about it in this document, is the missing middle housing. ADUs are identified as a middle housing option, and so ways that the city could better streamline that, I think, should be looked at. Unfortunately, from staff's perspective, when the ADU ACU discussion was brought up, there were a number of concessions made from the original document, and that was those concessions are made through a number of neighborhood meetings to get it to a point where the community in general was comfortable with the proposed ordinance. So yeah, there are a lot of barriers to constructing an ADU, and I personally, as city staff, think that we need to consider that and look at that again. But at the time, it was what was needed to happen just to get the ADU ACU discussion in the door and on our ordinances. So yeah, the concessions were a big piece of that.
Thank you.
Cindy's got a comment.
Oh, yes, come up.
Thank you. This I did write down, so I should be able to get through it quickly. Cindy Nabel, 1100 Phillips Street. In regards to, off of that comment about the ADUs, first, I did also want to say I want to thank the members of this, because I don't think this is an easy task, and I didn't like that it comes across as being always negative about it. There's some great ideas in here. You did a lot of work. It's hard not to react to the ones that you don't like. So I apologize. I was hoping, again, that communication needs to happen in the public, and I think it's going to be an important part of the whole thing you're doing here is to get the community more involved. There are several recommendations that have been brought forward to address this creative impact to create an impact on the housing insecurities that exist in our city and across the whole United States. But one thing I'd like to address is the recommendation that has been made to remove or revise the family definition. In the memo that was given to everybody for October of 2022, it says that the statement's made that the most immediate and simple solution that would impact the housing market is a low, no-cost solution, which is an opinion, not actually a fact. Evidence, some of the problems that were used as an example of things that have been actions that have been brought forward, like the ADUs, ACUs, and also the on-street parking overnight, were two of the examples that could make an immediate impact on the housing market at a low or no cost, that were put forward, and a lot of problems that people came forward on to say that they thought would be a big problem didn't come to fruition. But the problem is, again, having the information and the statistics behind it was not part of this, and it is not, again, it's an opinion, because the current part of, I got to get to the right place, sorry. We've had problems, number one, with the overnight parking, as was mentioned about snow removal, or we've had where there's not anybody that is taking care of that. In my area, there's people parking, no one gets tickets. As Mrs. Rope said, on Smith Street, she has seen it. It is happening. So it's not fair to say that it's not been a problem. It has been. You're just not hearing about it. And maybe Mr. Cordes is not, but it has had an impact in our neighborhoods. The accessory dwelling unit in the commercial units, there has been a problem. First of all, that only came through for council in April. It's not been even more than 6 months since it came through. At that time of this October paper, Mr. Cordes indicated that there have been nobody putting forth to build one. There's none been constructed. And there still hasn't, but there's one coming forward. The problem is we need to have more time for these new things, new ideas coming forward to see how they do impact our city. Before we say, let's just add 4 more or 5 more people to something, some of these solutions, they don't have any background in our city of what the fallout has been. But the higher residential density is not the product of making this more than where we are already is not going to be a positive effect for those in our downtown neighborhoods. The ADU, the person, we've already had a lawsuit come forward, someone that wanted to take it to court, and they had to go through extensive back and forth in lawyers' costs from Andrea, who fought and won for her ACU that the city said wasn't in compliance. So there are problems. Just not that it's been documented, it's not being brought forward, and we haven't had enough time to really have a documentation of any of these sorts of things to say, okay, this works or doesn't work. So when we're pushing so many of these things within the last year or two, we're rushing so many things. And I can only say, 43 years living where I do, I bought a house that's near campus, and there were rentals, but it used to be 75% were family homes, and now it's the opposite, 75% rental, not owner-occupied, and the neighborhoods have gone down. The only reason there's some good things in there is because we've had homeowners in the neighborhood and OMNA that started really fighting for making sure ordinances were being followed. But there has been a huge amount of neighborhoods in our center part of our city that have been taken down into rental where there's absentee landlords not even living in the state. So I want to make sure you understand that people are against some of these things because they want to see the proof of how they work first and not just keep on adding more things to implement and then say afterwards, because in the 70s, and we bought our house in 74, university didn't have space for people, and they allowed then for students to have rooming houses. And we've seen what has happened. And it has only developed into agreed for some landlords, and I say this again, not all landlords. We have a great landlord that owns the properties across from us. Sure, they're old houses, but he does maintain them. I see them, and I know you do too. There are many, as was brought forward earlier, that are doing this as it's their investments, and they don't even live here. And it is not done anything good for our housing stock that people could have. We bought an old house. It's 120 years old. So how do people come in and afford to even do anything at the middle income level like we were to come and buy a house and then have to do all this remodeling? You do it little at a time. So don't please make so many extreme changes that you can't document how it's working before we have what we already have, because we are a college town. Thank you.
Thank you. Anything else on?
Goal number 3.
Let's go to goal number 4 then.
So no significant changes to goal number 4 have been made. There were some recommendations to add in a few data points, which those were added months ago. But the only thing, I guess, following goal number 4, I guess, listening to any other comments or questions about if this goal should change, is the implementation table that's immediately follows goal number 4. Setting us up on a track to, as a city and all of the community partners that interact with the housing market, staff felt a need to at least put together a course of action if the community were to move forward with the recommendations outlined in this document, or at least one opportunity to coordinate some of that work. And so you have the implementation table in front of you that outlines and calls out specifically which recommendations are addressed where. So I know this is a pretty significant addition late in the game, so I kind of expect questions or thoughts, opinions on this section in particular.
So I have a comment just on the measurement, just the wording of the measurement. We have percentage of IDG's residents in support of housing. I think it would be better put supported through, federal, state city housing and independence initiatives, because I think some of these initiatives, some of what's in here is going to allow people to live independently, not in some supportive housing. So just to clarify the language, say it's the initiatives, support the initiatives that drive up that number.
Okay.
What page are you on?
22. It's one of the metrics
Yeah.
listed under number 2 for goal number 4.
Yep.
Instead of percentage of the residents in supportive housing, supported by.
Yeah, supported by.
Those
And it could be the federal, the.
State, local.
Yeah, federal, state, local, it could be the HUD, all those. I mean, I think the TIF initiatives, the other things in here are going to help IDD individuals live independently in the community, which is wonderful.
Yeah, that's really then flipping it to get, are we quantifying the goal really, rather than maybe something that's just a part of achieving that.
Thanks.
I guess the only thing I would address, the request support from local builders to draft sample floor plans. I guess my hope was that that was something that the city would put out, not something that we would request builders to provide samples.
Yep. I'll reword that. I think that the original intent of writing that was that the city would work with those folks to acquire them.
Okay.
Yeah, like if the city has them, then the builders look at them.
Yes.
Conversation begins.
Right.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that implementation chart is helpful and provides some level of accountability as soon as we accept this document as it moves forward. Track what we're doing. Does anyone see any, particularly under team responsible, if we're missing any particular groups that we want to include in those? Those look good to me.
Polly, this is Bobby Jai. I just want to make a comment. I really like that implementation section in there. I think that's very good. In terms of responsibility, it's responsible on all of us, as citizens to become informed, and to possibly, join coalitions that are dedicated to looking at affordable housing solutions, wherever we live. So this document isn't going to be the final say on anything. It's just the beginning steps of what's going to be a long process for all our municipalities and communities.
Yeah. With that, I would entertain a motion to accept this final draft.
I'll make a motion to accept.
Noah moves to accept. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Seconded. Any other final thoughts from the group?
There's a
Trevor, yes. Go ahead, Trevor.
Yeah, sorry, just a process thing. I think there might have been amendments made, so I don't know if you need to redo the vote on redo the motion on including amendments.
We'll just include those as friendly.
Yeah, I was going to say, thank
okay,
you for
gotcha.
that. But yes,
Thanks.
clarified that most suggestions were friendly and wording minor. Anything else? I'll call for a vote then. All those in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed would be no. Any abstentions? Lovely. And with that, we have, as a group, adopted a wonderful document that has taken a lot of hours of work from city staff and all of us here. So appreciate everyone's time and energy in going into that and making time on Wednesday afternoons and beyond. Oh, thanks, Bobby Joe.
Throw out one thing just for everybody that wasn't able to meet for some of the discussion on the unrelated. I think there's a lot has changed in the housing market in the last few years. Anyone that wants to grab lunch someday and just talk, I'm happy to grab lunch with anyone and kind of discuss through what my take on that is as a real estate agent, as a landlord. a lot has changed significantly in the last 3 years compared to where it was previously. So anyone that has questions or wants to talk about that before any of this would go to Plan Commission or anything, I'd welcome that discussion.
Thank you for that. With that, we will adjourn at 4:20.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
A video of this meeting is available for viewing on the city's website, stevenspoint.com/videos.